Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Coburn, Executive Vice President of Research America, and thank you for spending part of your day with us. We've saved a very special fireside chat for our last session of today. And joining us for discussion on priorities and progress is Dr. Robert Califf, Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, joined by Nancy Brown, CEO of the American Heart Association and a Research America board member. You can find both of their bios in the chat and in the lobby. And with that, I turn it over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Mike. And it's always a pleasure to be with my dear friend, Dr. Rob Califf. Rob, thank you so much for joining Research America's National Health Research Forum Fireside Chat. We're so grateful to you.
It's great to be here. Good to see you, Nancy.
Good to see you always. And, gosh, there's so many things we could talk about, including Duke basketball. But I think today we will focus on health-related issues. There's so many things going on in the FDA and in the government as it relates to health and well-being overall. I think I'd like to start by just asking you, this has been a whirlwind year this past year. When you think about the biggest developments that have happened in the FDA last year, what are you most proud of?
Well, first of all, let me just know Duke is now a football school as of this week. But
I saw that. Oh my gosh, who would have ever thought?
Who would have thought? That's right. When you use the word proud, Nancy, it's really hard to pick any individual thing. But the big things that are clearly happening in the FDA, the number one thing is the reorganization of the food side of the FDA. People are more in the medical products arena often don't recognize that food is almost half of what we do. And this has been an under-resourced and underappreciated area. I know the American Heart Association has appreciated and worked on it. But, the day I was confirmed was the day that the recall at Abbott happened with infant formula that led to a nationwide shortage that consumed a large part of my first 6 months at FDA. But in the process of that, we were able to take a hard look at the food side of the FDA. A lot of great people working hard, but not the right organization, not the right structure, not the right resources. So we got Reagan-Udall Foundation to do a study, and the recommendations were great. We're in the middle of implementing them now. So that's very important. And then, of course, we have tobacco, another one of your favorite topics, where we've also done significant reorganization. Mitch Zeller retired after many years of leading the effort there. And we have Brian King now as the new leader, and a much invigorated effort in the enforcement side and some major federal rules that should get finished this year that are in the hopper. One prohibiting menthol in cigarettes, and another prohibiting flavored cigars, and then a really big one that would be a draft, which is limiting the amount of nicotine in cigarettes, which could have a major impact on the almost 500,000 Americans that die every year from tobacco-related illness. I feel like I always have to say that more than once, because I think most people like me, when I first came to FDA in 2015, it just seemed like we had taken care of this problem. And I don't think there's anyone who believes that tobacco is not dangerous or would argue about it causing illness. But the fact is, we still have millions of people using combustible tobacco, and now we have the threat of vaping affecting our teenagers in a major way. So a lot of work being done there. In many ways, the medical product side of the FDA, it's just like I think the U.S. is continuing to be the innovator for the world. We have just amazing technology coming through every day, and a lot of hard decisions to make about which products meet the criteria for safety and effectiveness that you need to get on the market. But we can talk more about that later on.
Yeah, that's great. And what a breathtaking list of things to be proud of. You came back into the post as FDA commissioner, as you said, really during a time of a bit of a challenge for the agency, and yet you found a way to stay focused on the broader mission of the FDA. And your comment about food always makes me smile, because we at the American Heart Association has always said, you know, the first letter in FDA is F, and that stands for food. And so we're really grateful to you for your focus there, as well as on tobacco. But let's switch to a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart. And obviously an overarching goal of Research America is to attain the most rapid pace of advancement in both medical and public health domains. What do you think is necessary to accelerate and diversify scientific progress, and how can we increase participation in the US?
Well, first of all, I mean, scientific progress starts with basic science, and we are, without question, the world leaders in basic science with the massive funding of NIH that goes on. And now, of course, we have ARPA-H helping in the translation of that science from the technical perspective. But your question really refers to the generation of evidence. Once we've got a potential invention, I think a key number of people should always remember that on the drug side of the FDA, 90%, almost 90% of the drugs that get into phase 1 never make it to market, because when we do the human studies, Mother Nature is just a lot more complicated than our scientific understanding. So the vast majority of the time, we find there's a risk that exceeds the potential benefit, or a toxicity that was unexpected, or we engage the target correctly, but just doesn't have the biological effect in the intact human that we expected. So there is no substitute for doing the human clinical trials. And, you know, we've taken a good hard look at the clinical trials system. There's a Reagan-Udall Foundation report about to come out, and I can't talk about exactly what's in the report, but what I will say is, at least from my perspective, if we look at medical product development, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the sort of development phase, I think that goes really well. Where we really have a gap is after, you know, what happens at the end of phase 3 these days. Over half of our approvals are accelerated. And so we're putting things on the market with a lot of uncertainty about exactly in whom is this product most effective, and how does it compare to other products, and what's the value in a health system spending $4.3 trillion a year with the shortest life expectancy of any high-income country now, and seeing a decline in life expectancy in this country. And so we need participation that's representative of the population at risk. And of course, that means, you know, the traditional issues that we talk about with race, ethnicity, sex, gender, but it also means age, and it means where you live. One of the biggest factors evolving in the U.S., and I know you focused on this with some new funding at American Heart, and we talked about this a few years ago. I think I was right in being concerned about this, but rural America is seeing a huge deterioration in health status. And of course, if you live in a rural place, getting to a research center is hard to do. So to get that diversity that we need means that we have to look at how we do research and use much more virtual opportunity, make protocols simpler, involve clinics where people live so that they can participate. And again, this doesn't refer, like when you do a phase 1 study of a drug or a device, you need to measure everything under the sun in a very rigorous, detailed way that you need to be in a research center to do. But if you want to know if, let's just take the obesity drugs that are now so important, exactly who should be treated and what are the long-term outcomes. And now we're seeing that these drugs may be effective in a lot of other things like heart failure. You know, we can simplify those trials and involve representative populations. I do have one really good piece of news I want to break on this interview.
Excellent. We love good news.
Publications about it. It's a little complicated, so bear with me. If we look at diversity by the you know, really important initial criteria of sex, race, ethnicity. NIH has done a fabulous job, and there's data showing that right now, trials funded by NIH have a very representative population. And of course, a lot of that reason is that the NIH controls the funding of those clinical trials. But I want to give due shout out to NIH for the great work that's been done. Now, of course, there's a need for NIH to move on to these other issues like rural, and I know they're working on that. At FDA, you know, we are the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. U.S. is 4% of the world's population. It's a global industry, and we don't control, you know, what happens in other countries. And so when we look at our aggregate data, people have done a lot of talking about this. It doesn't look very representative of the United States, but we've just done a pretty major effort to segregate U.S. enrollment from non-U.S. enrollment. And guess what? At least the initial look, even FDA regulated trials done by industry, U.S. enrollment looks pretty representative. It's getting there like the NIH has already done. I think that's a major achievement. Now, it raises another question. What do we expect for diversity in a global population? There are 8 billion people in the world, and we're not the only country. So we're going to need to have discussions about what our expectations are for clinical trials. But at least we're straightening out, I think, some misperceptions. And I always feel like we're slow on giving credit when people have done hard work and made progress.
Well, that's such an important point. And I think you're right. You know, data in all cases really matters, and people knowing and understanding what the actual information is matters. And so that's wonderful news. Congratulations on that. And I think we all know, you know, that the power of the patient engagement in clinical trials is really key. And if you had to say a word or two to all of the leaders of organizations listening that have patients as part of their constituents, you know, give us a pep talk. What should we be doing about getting more patients engaged in research?
Well, you know, this started a long time ago, but patients are, you know, we now, in most cases, prefer to call those who participate in research participants, not subjects, because subject implies that we're the people doing things to people. We should really be working with them for the most part. So including those who will be affected at the table when studies are designed, all the way through the design, the conduct, the analysis and interpretation, and the dissemination of the information. And I think, you know, I give credit to those who thought of funding PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is developing the methods to do this. But at FDA, one of the first things to happen when people come in with a idea is we ask them, have you talked to the patients who will be affected by this technology? And very often that leads to significant changes in the research design. So being inclusive, not just in lip service, but actual involvement, we think is a really important part of the overall picture. And a really critical part of this, I think, is mutual education. A lot of scientists have not had the experience that people that may live in a rural area may have with a disease. And it's hard to understand that until you talk to people that are in that situation. By the same token, people out there have a lot of perceptions about scientists that are and what their intentions are that are incorrect. And by bringing these groups together, I think it can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And, you know, gosh, I think we all get educated every single day when we listen to a person, you know, who is living with one of the chronic diseases we are dealing with as organizations, and making sure those voices are front and center is really key. And, you know, switching gears, Rob, speaking about information and data and trust, which is what we always seek to endear from the public. We had a panel earlier today on combating misinformation. And as you well know, the spread of misinformation has had dangerous consequences. And I remember last year in November at the American Heart Association scientific sessions, you called misinformation the leading cause of death in America. Tell us about that. What do you think? What are the consequences of medical misinformation? And what approaches are you taking to tackle this public health crisis?
Well, thanks for bringing this up. It's really a tough issue. And the one little tweak I would make to what I said is I would say the leading cause of premature death, because, we're all going to die. I still love the quote that I learned early in my career: life is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality. So we're all going to die. But when we die, and the reasons that we succumb to an illness are modifiable based on the decisions that we make every day. The obvious one that we all talk about would be the vaccines. And of course, this year, for the first time in history, we'll have effective vaccines for all three of the major viruses that kill people my age. I'm about to turn 72. We're vulnerable to RSV, flu, and COVID. We got effective vaccines for all three, but there's a large effort out there to give people incorrect information about these vaccines that dissuades a lot of people from taking action to protect themselves and their families. But it doesn't stop with vaccines. This is really something that's affecting chronic disease. Statins in cardiology would be a good example. And so what do we do about it? I wish I had an answer. We are learning more and more about misinformation. I hope your panel came up with some great ideas. I mean, the things we know we all need to do is every individual needs to spend time every day being aware that many of our friends and neighbors are living in an information ecosystem which is dominated by views of science and medicine that are incorrect. And we also need to have humility that it's not like we have all the answers, and that's not what science is about. So transmitting that we are dealing with uncertainty, we're making our best judgments, but there are areas where we've done the right studies and we know, for example, that vaccination prevents death from and hospitalization from COVID. That's just a fact. And we need to be able to say that in a way that and embrace it after we've spent the time to be professionally adept at it. But what we also know is that individuals out there, the best way to correct misinformation is an interpersonal interaction. So it really will take a network of people. At the government level, we are working hard to get better at saying things in plain language. Back in the good old days, when I used to interact with the FDA as a clinician, the FDA made a lot of decisions. It wasn't necessarily a matter of public discussion. Now, every decision the FDA makes is a subject of 24/7 internet chatter from people who may have spent 10 seconds thinking about all the data and analysis that went into that decision. So we got to explain what we do in plain language, and we have to be preemptive where possible, where we think something that's important for public health is going to be attacked. I do want to emphasize, because it's a matter of recent court proceedings, in no way are we suppressing the right of other people to speak. First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason in the United States. And, where the line is about the old adage of you can't yell fire in the movie theater, where that line is related to public health has not been defined at this point. And so we have to be careful that we're not suppressing people's right to speak, but I also think it's incumbent upon experts and knowledgeable people to counter information that's incorrect, that's out there with the other point of view. Yeah. But I would say I've talked to all the experts I can find. I haven't found one yet that believes that we have the formula for moving this in the right direction. So we've really got to keep working on it.
I think it's all such important points, Rob. And, another area where sometimes there is misinformation, or people like to make their own information, is in the area of food. And we talked about food a little bit earlier. Recently, the FDA has unveiled new guidelines for designating a food item as healthy. Tell us a little bit about the FDA's nutrition policy, why it's significant, and how did evidence help shape this policy?
Yeah, this is really a tough and interesting arena, because food obviously is very complicated. One nice thing about being a doc who works with medications is when you give a medicine, you know exactly what you're giving. You know what someone's taking. Food is this mixture of hundreds of thousands of things that are in the food. So sorting out, for example, what's healthy and what's not, what the macro and micronutrient composition of food needs to be, it's really complicated. Guidelines come out periodically. That's a process that's run through public-private channels. But in the end, the FDA has responsibility for labeling most food. And one of the things that we think is really important is the general concept of what's healthy and what's less healthy. We have an industry that's making a lot of processed food that includes high levels of sugar and sodium and carbohydrates. And so it's complicated. So the idea is there's some general characteristics of food that would put it in a healthy category. And we think when people make that claim, it should be based on evidence, which that evidence emanates from the epidemiologic studies that have been done. I do want to note here, Nancy, that we are about to enter a new era, I think, of food-related research that can take advantage of technology because of big data. You need big populations because the effects of any individual meal are obviously tiny in the lifetime of a person. It's what you do cumulatively over time. And the ability to take a picture of food now and determine what's in it is moving along rapidly as a tool. So we'll get better and better at this. But for now, we hope that the average person like me, who's not very discerning in the grocery store, when going down the aisle, will be able to say, in general, this is a healthy food. I'll pick this one instead of the other one. That would be the hope. Now, all this, requires a lot of consumer research in addition to the science behind the recommendation. What are the words and pictures that people understand and respond to?
It's such a great point. And in our research at the American Heart Association, as it relates to consumer preferences, people really want to try to eat healthy. And it is helping people know and understand what's in a food product, short of having to have a degree to read a food label. So we really applaud this work at the FDA and all of the things you're doing, Rob. And as we close our conversation today, I can't thank you enough always for, piquing our interest and giving us a chance to support and to help you. I'd like to just ask you two closing questions. What are your biggest upcoming challenges, and how can this amazing community of Research America help you as advocates? How can we help you? How can we offer our support?
I think if you ask about within the FDA, I feel pretty good about where we are, but we need to enact all the changes that are underway on the food and tobacco side in particular. And I think we need to have a way of dealing with these big issues that you brought up, a better post-market evidence generation system, less a way to deal with misinformation and get it right. We haven't talked about drug shortages, but that's another one I just feel like I need to mention that. And what an odd paradox that we're seeing, other than obesity drugs, which is a whole separate set of issues. We're seeing these massive hundreds of potential shortages every year in very inexpensive generic drugs, where we got to fix that system because it affects so many people. And who would have thought sodium chloride would be in shortage, for example? It just doesn't make sense. So we're working on that. But I think the biggest thing is outside the FDA, as FDA is part of a team that includes Research America and other organizations and other federal organizations. We got to pull together and do something about the declining health status of America. I'm headed to Singapore next week. They're about to hit a 7-year advantage over us in life expectancy. And guess what? Their biggest national project is healthy life expectancy. I told them, you don't need more life expectancy. You're already, beating us, by 7 years. And their answer was, we want to stay healthy up until the end of life, in addition to living longer. This is not just a matter of doing better basic science. This really involves all this intersection of the real world and how we interact with each other to produce better health. So that, to me, is the big issue that we need to be focused on.
And how can we help you as commissioner of the FDA?
I still feel like at the core of it is having the evidence that we need about what works and what doesn't in a way that's convincing. And the thing I would add that I wouldn't have said a decade ago is help us in talking about that evidence in a way that helps a person living in a rural community or living in an urban community with inadequate financial resources, helps them navigate the world so that they can make the choices that lead to better health. I mean, we have countries that have, 1/10 of our average income who are living longer than we are in better health. So it's not just a matter of having money. It's a matter of having the right environment where you can make good choices for you and your family. And so Research America has done a great job in stimulating and supporting the research. We need to do that next part and help people understand how the research should impact their lives.
Well, that's a wonderful call to action for all of us at Research America and every organization represented here today. Commissioner Rob Califf, thank you for the incredible leadership you provide to this country, your inspirational approach to each of us as leaders in the health industry. We are so grateful to you, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks to you all, Nancy, you and Mary, real leaders in the field, and keep it going.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, thanks, Dr. Califf and Nancy. What a terrific conversation. I think, like me, all of our viewers would love to see double the time with you two. It's just a tremendous conversation of a number of issues that we can all take part in and helping to share the information to lead healthier lives through vaccinations, through food, nutrition. So what a terrific conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.